Miami International Festival of the Arts presents Ethnic Identity and National Culture, the making of Americans in the 21st century. Discussion led by Professor Octavio Roca.
My name is Professor Octavio Roca. I teach in the Arts and Philosophy Department of Miami-Dade College North Campus. I'm here talking with other Cubans like me. Professor Alena Fresquet, who teaches art and is a painter, and Professor Victor Gomez, who also teaches art and is a very, very beautiful painter. The one thing we have in common is that we're Cuban Americans, or maybe Cubans. And one thing that's going to be the base of the conversation today is this whole thing about being Cuban American, Irish American, Mexican American, gay American, black American. Do we have to live in that hyphen? Or is that actually what American looks like? In other words, does it have to be a dominant culture that defines us, or do we define ourselves? In this particular case, it's a question I've looked into in my book, Cuban Ballet, and I wondered about Cuban dancers who left and who stayed. The ones who stayed in Cuba, of course, are fine and are doing dancing, and they're Cuban. The ones who are here, influencing American ballet and dancing at American Ballet Theater, San Francisco Ballet, Miami City Ballet, are actually creating American dance. Are you still Cuban? And I want to ask this question of my colleagues, because all of us are working artists. I write in a language that isn't my first language or even my second, and you both paint. And you're Cubans of a different kind than me. I grew up in Havana. You came here as a toddler, Alena, and you were born in New Jersey, but you're Cuban.
Oh yeah, thoroughly.
So
my pedigree seals it because even though I was born in New Jersey, I was raised in Hialeah. So
Hialeah is more Cuban than
way
Cubans
more
are there.
Cuban.
So what do you think of your art? Do you paint Cuban?
You know, I gotta say, I think I do. In that, you know, a lot of my heroes in painting are Cuban. A lot of the decisions I make about the subject matter not being so highly representational, but somewhat suggested and maybe even magical. I'm very comfortable, I guess, as a Cuban, having my work be living in both realms, the world you see and the world you don't see. And that's something that Cubans are very comfortable with.
You're right, and Cubans maybe in Cuba aren't as comfortable now, because one thing I wanted to bring up, because I know your work, and I admire your work very much. It's not like the work being done in Cuba right now. And the influence I see in your painting, and certainly in a lot of the art you made, is more a result of being exposed to American art.
Oh, definitely.
So how does that jive with being a Cuban artist?
I guess it's just being an artist. And I guess it's kind of like, I guess if you're Cuban, you're done with using boats as subject matter, because if you paint a boat, it has to be about freedom, but I'm not from Cuba. You know, what I know about Cuba is my parents, shopping for food, the music, the parties, you know? So my culture is very, almost like this by proxy nostalgia that I get from my parents, you know? And I do get exposed to Cuba now with my students that are coming here now. And it's a very different Cuba that they talk about than the one that my parents talk about.
But yet you're from New Jersey.
Right, which is...
And I was born in Cuba, but I was on a plane at the age of 4. My first transatlantic flight at the age of 4. And I don't see myself any relation to Cuba. I don't see myself as a Cuban artist. So I'm an artist.
So is it fair to call you a Cuban American artist or no?
No, it's fair to call me an artist. Without the American or the Cuban, because it has nothing to do.
I kind of like that. And I wonder if we can go on with that, because frankly, what defines that particular label? When you think someone like Igor Stravinsky, a great Russian composer, did all his work in Paris and Los Angeles. James Fenimore Cooper, Last of the Mohicans in Naples. Do you really contribute to where you happen to be? And this is home for all three of us right now. We're not planning to go back to Cuba anytime soon. I mean,
but mind you,
let me throw this at you.
Yeah.
Jose Marti, the great Cuban poet and patriot, did most of his poems in Tampa and New York. Now, is he the first Cuban American?
Probably.
Yeah, I think so.
Probably he's the first Cuban American.
You know,
I think that national identity comes into play. You know, we think about it when two things happen. Either there's a cure for cancer, you discover God, everybody wants to know who discovered it. Oh, he's Cuban American, he's American, etc. Yes. Or you commit a crime. When you commit a crime, everybody wants to know and disassociate yourself.
And yet, if you're part of the dominant culture, you don't. nobody ever writes about, an Anglo-Saxon Protestant committing a crime. It's just somebody committed a crime. Let it be a Cuban or a gay
to
or a black.
Marginalize.
A
To
gay
marginalize.
suspect, a black. Yeah, you're marginalized. So what do you do with that otherness that is actually put on you?
Uh-huh. And the only reason that I know I'm Cuban American or I'm Cuban and American.
I just told you.
Yes, because you told me, because I'm reminded, even though I have lived in this country for 40 years, 41 years now in April, I'm reminded constantly because I maintain an accent. I have an accent, and that distinguishes me as somebody from another place.
You have more of an accent than the two of us.
Than the two of you, even though I arrived here at the age of 9. But I was rebellious. I spent 10 years of my life refusing to speak this language. Not
Really?
because I wanted to be Cuban, because I have never associated myself with being Cuban. I grew up in Spain, and that became more of an identity for me as I was growing up than Cuba or America. And then having the feeling of otherness for 40 years in this country has never let me feel American at all. So when I'm doing my art, none of that goes through my mind. I think that I seek alternate identities that are not national. I see myself as a woman artist, I see myself as a feminist artist, and any other categorization that I can put, but never an identity of a national identity,
And yet, isn't that what an American is? I mean, think about it. Unless you're a Cherokee, you're an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that, depending on how far back you want to go, it may or may not be something that everybody else calls you. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a great book called Anti-Semite and Jew. He did it before the Holocaust. It's really a visionary book. And he talks about the label Jew being thrust on Jews. So what you do is you take it, you empower it, and you use it, which is how the Zionist movement was born, actually, and the State of Israel was born that way. Well, in our case, but in the case of a lot of hyphenated artists, maybe Cuban American is something they put on you, like gay American, like black American. And yes, that is an identity you have because it's how the other looks at you. You know you're more, but you're limited or maybe empowered by that. What do you think?
I think it's a personal thing because it comes down to that simplest of all, the 1 or the 0. You either embrace this identity or you reject the identity. But the funny part that you brought out is how no matter what your personal decision is, people will always remind you
That
Yes.
you are.
what you are or what they think you
And
are.
not so much in
You
Florida,
know?
but I travel to Maine or I travel to New England, and that's the first thing. Where are you from? So it's really more of a concern. Having the national identity is more of a concern of people as they view you than as the artist looking out into the world.
And
Yeah.
No, it's an important issue now because there's so much hatred and ignorance around the issue of immigration. And it is mostly Hispanic immigration we're talking about. And you'll notice that if you have a Spanish last name, they're going to ask you where you're from. If your last name is Smith, they won't do that. Or you could be Welsh, you could be Irish, you could be Scottish, you could be many things.
Well, I have a French last name, and I'm still asked because the moment I talk, my accent defines
my
it.
name is Catalan because my grandfather was Catalan. It's like Smith in Barcelona, Roca.
Yeah.
But think about it. In what sense is that something you have to carry?
Always.
I don't
Why?
carry it.
Depending- It's the way it is, and it depending on, I guess, the circle of intellectuality that you're dealing with. That's important to some people, what and who you are. Some people know. Some people, your ideas are what define you.
I'm Cuban by birth, but not by, or let's say that I have decided on my identity. It's definitely not Cuban.
And
It's
yet,
just an aspect that I was born in Cuba. I could have been born in Hawaii. I could have been born in...
we have no choice on that.
Yeah.
I think it's always evolving too, right?
Right.
Isn't it always just this mutable thing? Because look at this next generation. Their cultural identity is being based with this hybrid of, what they're taught at home with a balance of what the internet and what MTV is telling you to go buy, and it's this balance between tradition and this obsession with this outer persona, like who
But
you are, what you own.
I think in a way this multi-identity that we have, we're obsessed with, creates somewhat of a schizophrenic personality in society. In reality, young people today don't know what they are. They're born here. but yet they carry the ethnicity that they come from,
Yes.
wherever they come from. And this is this constant play. It's like a ping pong, I'm at home, I'm Nicaraguan or Venezuelan, whatever, and then in school I'm American, and I don't know that creates a solid identity.
I don't know that it ever has, though.
Uh-huh.
And that's one thing worth exploring, because the truth is we all have many identities, and some of them are put on you, some of them you embrace, but there they are.
But I've been in Brazil, which is a large country. It's as bigger, I think, than America. And when you talk to anybody in Brazil, you could be talking to an African descent person, you could be talking to a Japanese, completely Japanese, and you say, where are you from? Brazilian. And you're like, yeah, but you look Japanese. Yeah, but I'm Brazilian. America is the only one that has an obsession with hyphenating who you are. And so I don't think America has ever, nor will it ever, create an American, period. We are always Irish American,
and yet,
Cuban
let me correct you on
American.
that, because there is a very popular phrase that's really oppressive called all American looks. And all American looks
and what is
means a
that?
basic hot white boy or white girl and blonde. And the truth is that country was never that. And it's also never always English speaking.
No.
More than half of what is done in the United States spoke Spanish a good century before it spoke English.
Well,
The
it
first
was
cities in
Spanish.
this country were Spanish cities. And yet, you're the one who's asked where you're from. When I
Yeah.
lived in California, I was told more often than I care to remember, funny, you don't look Spanish. And it's like, because what they mean by Hispanic is Mexican American, which does look different because they're a very different kind of mix of race. Even our accents, a Hispanic accent on the East Coast is very different from a Hispanic accent on the West Coast.
You know,
And in fact, the politically correct thing to do here is to call yourself Hispanic. It's totally verboten in Los Angeles. And I know because I worked in newspapers, and you couldn't use the word Hispanic, you had to use Latino,
Right.
Wow.
whether you knew how to speak Spanish or not, which led to ridiculous things like Latino woman, no, Latina. But people who don't speak Spanish use that a lot. So what do we do? Do we go along with it, or
We just keep on living and showing people, you blink, 10 years go by. This has been a subject that
It's
has
life.
been going on for 50 years that I know of, and it's
But
been
in the
going
issue
on.
of art,
Yes,
I
please.
think that, which is the same when, there's a period of art called feminist art, which doesn't make any sense to me because
No.
women artists have been making art.
Ana Mendieta was very much that.
Yeah, but I mean, there
Speaking of
was
Cubans, yeah.
there was a feminist imagery, but in reality, women painting has been going on for since the Renaissance we've had.
Right.
So to call us Latin, I don't function within the Latin concept of art because my art has no references to. I
No,
don't.
neither of you. And I know your work, and it's brilliant, and it's not what's being done in Cuba.
And it's just
No.
contemporary
In fact,
art.
that was being held
It's-
back a little, I think, right now.
It's current art, so it brings the point that do I want to exploit from an artistic point of view my ethnic heritage, perhaps. If I wanted to, and I had intended to sell here in Florida, perhaps, yeah, painting a couple of vessels, painting some fruits.
Some coffee makers,
some
Portocarrero looking
virgins,
things,
yes.
some bananas.
And exploiting the nostalgia, the return to Cuba. If I exploited that, perhaps I would fall into the collector.
That's actually another interesting point, because 2 million people left Cuba. And the first batch of exiles actually left to wait. I mean, unlike the Jews who left
Yeah.
Germany and Austria, they didn't leave because I heard great things about Brooklyn. They left because they were about to be killed.
Right.
In the case of the Cubans, let's leave for now, but we're going to go back
Well,
soon.
we're gonna return.
And they were still waiting. So
And then
at some
my
point-
family
Yeah.
left, which is a second
Yeah.
wave.
Yeah.
And we left because, whoop, this is not looking very good. Let's get out of here.
Right.
So
And you
it-
knew it wasn't going to change.
no, it wasn't going to change.
Mine left in the 70s, the 68.
That's really, yeah.
That's like the last
The last
Gusano,
batch.
they were called.
Until the
exit.
second batch, which is the Mariela
Mariela.
exit,
The Mariela
a whole
and
different
then-
exile, and the more recent waves.
Ethnic identity and national culture. We'll be right back.
Cool programs for hot jobs. Let Miami-Dade College jumpstart your career. We offer bachelor's degrees in film and TV production, electronics engineering, supervision and management, and nursing. Or choose from 300 other programs. With our flexible course schedules, you can take classes during the day, evening, weekend, or online. For more info, visit mdc.edu or call 305-237-8888. Get the knowledge and training for today's in-demand jobs. Register now.
Welcome back to Ethnic Identity and National Culture. panel discussion led by Professor Octavio Roca.
At some point, American culture is a work in progress and always has been, and we're it. I mean,
quilt.
you know, you're artist, I'm writing, and guess what? We're publishing in English. You're showing in American galleries. This is American art. This is American writing. This is what American looks like in the 21st century. And maybe it is a matter of not letting them put the label on you, or assuming the label, empowering with it, and say, you know what, American is Hispanic American today.
I think that's more the way to go.
Yeah.
And in embracing and absorbing, and also like in a weird way cannibalizing, you know, and just like eat it and turn it into something else, because it's not that idea of classification. These ethnicity terms are almost mythological, right? Because they keep changing. They're almost like you know what Cuban means, but what does it mean? Really?
I'm amazed with them because I have students that are born here, but yet they identify with Cuba, with their Cuban identity.
Well, there's
even
a Miami accent that is a definite Cuban accent.
Yeah.
I mean, when I moved back here, and I escaped Miami High when I was 18, and I returned just 9 years ago. And it was really interesting to find there is a Miami accent. I mean, everybody sounds like Gloria Estefan. And it's
You know,
it's interesting, but it's funny.
It's the
it doesn't
exact
sound like
opposite.
Hispanics in California. It doesn't sound like Hispanics New Yorkers in New York.
Right.
It's Miami, and a lot of it is. And I've seen with my students, it's not students who speak Spanish, it's students who speak English that way.
In
Even
that
my own
accent,
accent, because I
in
sponge
that
accents wherever I am.
accented
I sound more Cuban since I moved here.
We were not allowed to speak Spanish. We were
Wow.
not allowed to, you know, let anybody know that we were Hispanic. And I remember growing up in Hialeah, it was the exact opposite. We were forbidden to speak English. Not
Well, that
as a
explains a lot.
rejection of English, but because my parents weren't bilingual and they thought that me and my sister were conspiring against them, which we were. But how it was celebrated in me to have this pride, it's really squished in a lot of
Victor,
towns of need.
Isn't this just the immigrant experience? But I mean, it is interesting. Every immigrant group has to deal with that, and every successful immigrant group gets over it and moves on.
Well, my
And-
grandmother was the first Cuban in the block in Hialeah.
Oh my
And
God.
mind
The
you,
first
there's
Cuban
an,
in Hialeah?
yeah, there's an East and a West Hialeah. We lived in West Hialeah, and there's a difference. Now there's not much difference.
Was that
but
the Everglades?
no, the West was the more Americanized. The East has
Oh, I see.
always
Okay,
been
okay,
very Cubanized. And my grandmother was the first, and we became our front door neighbors were
What
the
year was
last
this?
American.
To give a
Well, my
context.
grandmother moved in 1964 to the neighborhood. And by the time we arrived in the 70s, there was only, we call them Mr. Rogers. But the difference is that the Cuban identity cannot, for example, my mother, when you ask her, you know, do you want to return to Cuba? In my experience, is no way. You know, she's already settled on the idea that she's getting buried in America. And my father is the one that started the thing that, you know, had he been given the choice, the last place he would have been born would have been Cuba. And he's a well-known Cuban artist. You know, so I mean, Cuba embraces him as an artist, but he hates the identity of being a Cuban artist. So, you know, for us Cuban immigrants, we don't have a choice of a return. But we haven't had it
No, and
until
you have,
now.
and you
We
have to
haven't.
think
50
practically.
years later, we haven't
It's
had
like the
it.
Soviet. The Russians didn't have a choice of a return.
Whereas
It's
a
very
Ja-
much that kind of art.
A Jamaican artist or a Haitian artist or Colombian artist, they all can return, they can visit, they can enjoy their own culture. We cannot. We can go to Cuba. I haven't lost anything in Cuba. I have no need to return.
No.
But
No se te perdió nada por ahí.
no, there's
Is-
nothing
is-
nothing I need to go see in Cuba. So for me, the memories that I do have are from Spain because that was my formative year.
I was-
So
No,
I don't have, so my nostalgia will be more of returning to a Spain than it would be to returning
And
to
Spain's
Cuba.
changed a lot.
Definitely.
I mean,
Definitely.
Most liberal country in Europe, they used to be the most fascist country in Europe after
Yeah.
the war. But that's a
I
big
lived
change.
during that fascist period.
Yeah, it must
in
have been
the,
hard.
in the 70s, yeah. It was enjoyable.
So were we
It's-
wrong to have a panel on what makes Cuban artists Cubans? None of us turned out to want to call ourselves that. That's
Well, he's
interesting.
Cuban, I'm not.
Well, I mean, how am I Cuban? The way I look,
Your image, yeah.
I can cook a pig.
Ah,
I can.
Hey, I can't cook a pig.
I can plant banana trees. You know, I have an agricultural background and stuff like that. I like the Punto Guajiro music. My parents own land in
I-
Naples and in
Yeah, no,
Homestead.
yeah,
So
the farmers.
I
they
have
get
a
to
measure
play.
of
They get to
Cubanness.
play that. But is the agriculture only the focus? No. You
How
grew up
many
in the
times a
city. You
year
grew
do
up in
you
the
eat
city.
frijoles negros?
How many times a year?
Yeah.
Before January when I did my diet, like once a month.
Oh, no.
man.
Okay,
yeah,
how
I-
many times a year do you eat frijoles
I
negros?
make the best in Miami, and I make
Okay.
the most.
The last
I'm a good
time,
cook.
let me tell you the last time I
picadillo.
had frijoles negros 2 years ago.
I have to make some for you.
Yeah.
I'll bring some.
So
for
I
you.
think that's
There's a
the
promise
measure
on
of
camera.
Cuban.
I'm
Really?
bringing
What
this woman-
about when was the last
Black
time you had a
beans,
cup of Cuban coffee?
She cannot not have black
I
beans.
make French press. So I don't do Cuban coffee. I
I'm
make
gonna
a
take-
French
I'm gonna
press
take
Now,
every
Now,
morning.
here's a great
Yeah.
this is a Cubana arrepentida. Right?
No,
Arrepentida.
renegade they call me. yeah.
Renegade?
But I never embraced it.
My
You know,
dad-
other than Jose Marti when I had to do the.
Oh, but he's
Mi
international,
zapatico
please.
rojo, whatever.
Don't diss Jose Marti. Come
No,
on.
no, no.
Okay.
Just
Well, they
that
always say
point.
there's nothing Cuban about Cuban coffee, right? The beans are from Colombia, the machines from Italy, and the cups are from China.
Not anymore. Now everything's from China.
These really are all labels, but the truth is, everybody's going to put a label on you. On the other hand, you know better. You're either willing to go along with the label or you don't.
Yeah, it's almost like this chemical drive. You can't help it to categorize,
Or you can help
place
it.
people.
You can help it, but you know better.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think of the global Cuban identity? Is that?
Well,
that
there is such a thing, and that's what's
Yeah.
Yeah, there
puzzling.
is. There.
You can call it, I'm holding on to my Cuban identity. You also can call it noticing that you're the one creating an American identity. Because American dance today, American ballet in particular, has a Cuban accent. And the way that you have a Florida accent, dancers today dancing in companies in this country are so influenced by Cuba. And it's no reason for that, because Cuba's little.
Yeah.
There are 11 million of us. We all could fit in New York. But it's an influence comparable to the one of the Soviets who left in the 70s and 80s. And we know why they had to leave, and they had to leave. But people like Nureyev and Makarova and Baryshnikov changed American ballet, and in fact became American ballet. In fact, Mikhail Baryshnikov himself is exactly my age, and he's still dancing. He changed American modern dance. He became a great American modern dancer after he stopped being a great ballet dancer. You can't call him Russian.
Is that
Or
we
can-
have to
or can you?
think? We have
You
to
know?
stop thinking America as one single unit. It's
Yeah.
really
Right,
a tapestry.
Right, that's the thing.
A tapestry of different cultures that come together. The music is
Wait.
influenced by so many,
Yeah, wait.
by Brazilian jazz, by Cuban sounds. So, at some point, identity, as far as American identity, we should just have that catalog. American should imply all this diversity.
Right, and that's why I find things like All American so offensive. Because for one thing, it always
Because-
means white.
No,
but I
definitely
mean,
not.
also, it's like it never was like that.
No.
Never.
You know, with the art legacy, I
Yeah.
couldn't help but interjecting, reminding everyone that if it wasn't for World War II,
Well, art would not be in America.
Everybody.
of intellectuals coming from
To
Europe
America,
over here,
yeah.
we wouldn't even have. It wasn't until 1954
That
that
it became.
painting was considered a non-trivial thing of study. They
Right.
only had
Yeah.
art history, but studio
And
study.
because the European artists were
Hans
coming to be
Hoffman,
teachers here, that's
all
why
of
it became
the
important.
Bauhaus came over, is
Yeah.
what happened, and brought that aesthetic. If
And
it wasn't
Joseph
for that,
Albers and all
oh,
these
yeah.
people.
No, yeah, the first wave after Franco's fascist takeover of Spain and then World War II, the New World benefited from that. I mean, Latin American
Yeah.
universities and everything here benefited from the intellectuals who left Spain. And then when everybody left Central Europe, of course arts changed. They changed a lot. And that's why the composers and artists and dancers and everybody else who left, we call them American now or not. And it's almost an arbitrary label, what you call them, but they were making art here.
Yeah.
And they changed art here the way that, frankly, this generation is changing the arts here in this country right now. It was never the case that it was all what the Puritans might call as, descendants of the whatever, Mayflower. They weren't here first anyway.
No. Yeah.
And, oh, for God's sake, and they were not the only ones.
No.
So it's a
No,
myth
we-
to pretend that we're changing the United States. No, the United States was always this. Well, part of what we're all fighting is this lack of shared culture.
Yeah.
You can't assume today
Ignorance.
people know.
Yeah.
And Socrates pointed out that the first step to learning is know that you don't know. And a lot of people now, beginning with newspapers, the idea that we don't have to know that, or why do I need to
No,
know
we-
that?
yeah, we do.
And the only answer to that is because I don't know it yet. And what we bring to the table, Hispanics, as Cubans, as whatever we are, is a different color to what you say is the dominant culture.
Yeah.
In other words, a necessary color, not because it's an agenda, but because it's there.
My dad will tell me his 2 friends who Che Guevara murdered. So it's not like this
That's a
is
real
a,
thing.
And I have a
yeah, it's
cousin
not
that
like
was
it's
murdered
a
at
it's
the
a
age.
story I hear. This really happened. There's pictures of these people in our family. They're no longer in our family anymore just because of the way they thought.
Right.
You know.
And I have an 18-year-old cousin that was killed in Havana, during the student things by Che Guevara. So, it's something that cannot, I will not forget
And that
it.
addresses, this is our topic, but I mean,
It's like-
the issue of reconciliation and what change may come in Cuba, how that would affect Florida, because Florida has a lot of Cubans. And what kind of change, I may as well ask you, what kind of change do you think is coming? Because the arts in Cuba are going to change if things open up.
For my generation, I don't think it'll change anything because we never knew
No, we're
Cuba.
done.
For my for my mother, she's buying her mausoleum already, so it doesn't matter. I don't think she would want to be buried over there. So I think it would be more of an issue for the new generation that has to create commerce, and perhaps Cuba becomes a location of
But yeah, it's an issue for
commerce,
Cuba, not
for us.
Not for us.
Not
And that's
for us.
interesting. The premiere of the world, the hemisphere premiere, Giselle, happened in Havana 3 years after the premiere in Paris. It took 100 years to get to New York. I mean, Cuba had a major culture. The myth that it's a third world country was
No, it
useful.
never was.
It was useful for Cuba
It never
and for the
was.
United States to say, look how crappy it is. And the revolution could say, oh, look how crappy we're trying to get out of, but they were never that.
You actually grew up when it was considered the empire. Before
Yes.
before communism.
No,
you
I
know,
grew up in a
and-
city that had a major ballet company, an opera company, a symphony, that had a lot of very lively new theater.
Well,
that
the
later I found out-
Havana Biennale continues to be a strong Biennale.
Within limits, yes.
Within the limits,
Yeah.
but it's still, I mean, it was considered an important.
And Havana
Biennale,
International
and
Ballet
continues.
Festival is still one of the major ballet
Yeah.
festivals. On the other hand, other art forms haven't flourished. Architecture, for obvious reasons, there's no material, hasn't really much. And writers can't write.
Yeah.
Most Cuban literature done in the last 50 years has been done in exile, or they've been forbidden, and that is true. I mean, that's just it.
Your first identity is the one your parents superimpose on you.
Yeah.
And then when you become an adult, that same idea, you either embrace whatever Cubanosity they threw at you, or you reject it, or you have some type of inner balance where you don't hate, you can't hate yourself. You have to love who you are and love who you're becoming. And it's so hard to put a label on an ever-evolving thing. You know, it's so hard to classify that because it's going to change after my conversation with you today.
Any final words? Because the title of this, Making of Americans in the 21st Century, have we made ourselves Americans? Is this who we are?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's who we are, like it or not. You know, the mold is changing, and you know, it's bigger because I keep bringing up this word practical. You know, it's not just a Cuban artist. We got Cuban senators. We got Cuban governors that are coming up. You know, yeah, they're grooming them. We have them in the infrastructure. They're in the tax. They're attorneys. They're running for state representative. It's not going away.
Yeah.
We're making play. You know, so it's not just within the creative endeavors.
American, I say.
We're all over the place.
We're not getting
America.
Americanized. We're reminding America, the United States of America, what America is.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's even more important.
And it's
I
even
think so.
infecting more than just Dade County.
Yeah.
You know, it's starting to
Oh, no, it is.
to go worldwide.
Thank you, Victor
Thank
Gomez.
you.
Thank you, Alena Fresquet, who may or may not be Cuban. I'm Octavio Roca from the Arts and Philosophy Department of Miami-Dade College, North Campus. Thank you very much for this. It really was a fun talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a special presentation by the Miami International Festival of the Arts. We thank you for watching.